Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Whoever's watching, please let me know ASAP that the audio's working fine, because I've got a bad habit of messing everything up. Looks like it's fine. Alhamdulillah. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How is everybody? So yeah, interesting topic. I've had to talk about this a couple of times quite recently. People get confused about the subject very often. And so I wanted to do a little thing about it. I've got all this bloody stuff that I keep intending to use and I never do. So I'm going to make use of it. Alhamdulillah, everyone can hear me. Alhamdulillah, I'm good. And I hope you're all well also. So yeah, let us begin. So we're going to use something new, which is my iPad. Well, it's not new. My iPad's like 1,000,000 years older. And it's rose pink. And it's also bent a little bit. But we make do. So bismillah. So yeah, we're going to be discussing a couple of different things today. Inshallah. What was... I'm going to begin with semantics. Because this is important. What do we mean when we use words like atheism, theism, that kind of thing? So that's going to be the first point of discussion. The second thing we'll discuss will be argumentation. Argumentation. I'm a bit annoyed already that I've done capital letters for point number 1 and then not for point number 2, but I'm not rewriting it. Argumentation, and then we're going to discuss burden of proof. I may do it in another order. What I want to turn this into a course. So this is me just sort of riffing at the moment. I want to get something out there that I can maybe formalize a bit better, and then produce something proper out of it. But we're going to begin here. So the first thing is semantics, definitions of words. And more particularly, we're going to be talking about the definition of atheism, because this is what is controversial. So definitions. Specifically with regards to atheism. Now, it's arbitrary. Number one, it's arbitrary. You can use whatever word you want. Some people don't like the way I use the word atheism, and they often throw a hissy fit, and they're like, well, that's not what an atheist is. I've got news for you. It doesn't matter. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to go through what I mean when I use this. But you could call it something else. If you want to call it a marshmallow, if you want to call it, a supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, whatever you want to call it, we'll call it that. Yeah, I really don't mind. I have a particular reason as to why I use the word atheism to mean one thing and agnosticism to mean another, and I don't make them synonymous, because I find it more helpful. And you'll see, as I go through this, why I define atheism the way that I do. But again, it's semantics. This definition that I'm going to use, I give it a title, and the title I give it is atheism. Because this is how it's used in philosophy. So if you pick up a book on the philosophy of religion, the word atheism is typically used like this. In pop atheism, or in the... on the YouTube world, or with the layman and, popular atheists like Aaron Ra and things like that, these words are used differently. I get that. And what will happen is I'll define atheism some way, and they'll be like, that's not what an atheist is. I don't believe that. It's like, oh, well, it's not referring to you then. Call it something else. Like, if you use atheism another way, it doesn't matter to me. Atheism could be defined as a hard-boiled egg for you. So long as I know the definition that you're working with, it doesn't matter. Yeah, if you come up to me and say, I use atheism this way, I'm happy to grant that, because for me, I'm just trying to engage with your idea. and whether or not it has merit, etc. And the other way as well, like you can have a conversation with me, even if you don't want to use the word atheist, you want to call it a marshmallow, that's fine. Yeah, if you want to do that, we'll just scratch that out and we'll call it marshmallow. Yeah, it doesn't really matter at all. And you should get that now when I go through this as well. So why would I define atheism the way that I do? So firstly, I define atheism as the inclination or the assent to a proposition. That is the belief that God does not exist. Yeah, I already feel atheists fuming in the air. I can feel the the anxiety. So I define it as, you could say that they think that the proposition God exists is false, or you could just say they believe the proposition that God doesn't exist is true. These two statements here I consider identical. Yeah, they're identical. With regards to the proposition God exists, they believe that the truth value assigned to that is that it is false. With regards to the statement God doesn't exist, which is essentially like you could, in terms of like if you were to algebra this or turn it into letters, if X is God exists, then God does not exist is simply not X. So that would be this one. And then this one would be this one. Yeah, that's all that means to me. And the reason I don't refer to lack-theists, people who just lack belief, as atheists, is because I call them something else. I call them lack-theists. If you simply refer to yourself as someone who just lacks belief, I'll call you a lack-theist. And if you refer to yourself as someone who doesn't know whether or not it's possible to know whether or not God exists, I'll call you an agnostic. So these are the terms that I use. So we've got atheism, which is that. We've got lack-theist. Which is, just lacks belief. And then we've got the agnostic. The agnostic I break into two parts. I'm really inconsistent with my handwriting. So the agnostic is the one who does not know if God exists or not. Now, like I said, this could be broken up into two. So number one is the soft agnostic, which is essentially just someone, it's a personal claim. So this person makes a claim of themselves. They say, I do not know whether or not God exists. But they're not making an absolute claim about everyone else and the possibility of knowing whether or not God exists. As far as the soft agnostic is concerned, it might be possible to have justified belief in theism or atheism. They've not really engaged in the debate, and or it's confused them quite a lot, or they don't care. There's a number of reasons why they might just make this personal claim. They don't really make the claim about anyone else. Maybe people are justified in atheism. Maybe people are justified in theism. Maybe one's wrong and the other's right, or vice versa. But they just don't know because they've not really engaged in it that much. And then you have the hard agnostic. And this is someone who makes an absolute claim that it's not possible to know the truth value of this statement. It's not possible to know if it is true or false. It's not possible to know if this one is true or false. Now, with this one is just like a psychological condition. Even then, we can have a discussion about that. But mainly, I just want to discuss these two, so atheism and agnosticism, in relation to each other. So the conversation can happen on two levels. There's the conversation can occur, and I'm going to be using big words here. If you don't understand them, don't panic. Please don't complain. I will try to define them as well, but you will just need to bear with them, and you can go define them on Google, this kind of stuff, but just bear with it, and inshallah, it will make sense. Don't worry if you don't get it to begin with, if you're new to it. Sometimes it can be a bit intimidating, but don't worry. So there's two conversations we can have. The first one is called ontology, or an ontological discussion. I hope I'm using these words right. This is how I've sort of used them anyway, or how I'm categorizing it. Please correct me if I'm wrong, or if you think I'm wrong. And the second one is epistemology. Now, the first one is the conversation between the theist versus the atheist. So this is about the existence of God. Does God exist or not? So this is a discussion about that. Does God exist? It's not, at this point in the conversation, there's no debate about the possibility of knowing. Yeah? At this point, there is a proposition, yeah, which is God exists. And the discussion is whether or not this is true or false. Yeah, the theist says it is true. And the atheist puts themselves at polar opposite end of this and calls it false. Now, if you don't want to call this atheist, again, that's fine. Scratch that out, call it a marshmallow, call it a pigeon, call it whatever you want. Yeah, I don't really care. It doesn't matter. It's just semantics. It's pretty arbitrary. You don't need to make a big deal about it. I'm just letting you know how I use the word, and then hopefully as well, you'll understand why I use it this way as well. Because we need a name for this person, because they exist. Not everyone who's called an atheist does think this is the case. Yeah? Not everyone who's atheist or identifies as an atheist claims that the proposition God exists is false. Many of them say, no, I'm not sure. I'm an agnostic atheist, or, I just withhold belief, or whatever. Whatever it is. Usually people, or the lay people that identify as atheists, often fall into either what I would refer to as lacktheism or agnosticism. Either the soft or the hard forms of it. But here, I just need a word. And the thing is when people say, no, that's not what an atheist is, then I'm like, well, what word do we use for this? Because they do exist. Like Aaron Ra quite clearly says that God does not exist, and that statement is true. He's made that claim. He's been on Thought Adventure podcast. He's said it explicitly. I've spoken to lots of people who make the claim that the statement God exists is false. Or they make the claim that the statement God does not exist is true. They exist. So what do we call them? What name do we give them? Now, if you want to call an agnostic an atheist, that's fine. But there are distinctions between these people. They're not the same as this person. Yeah, they're not making the same claim. One is having a discussion about ontology. Yeah. And they say, or this group of people who exist say, it is possible to know that God does not exist. It is possible to know that there is no such thing as a God. There are people like this in the world, and we need a name for them. We need a word so that we understand who that group is and how they differ from this group. Yeah? So I call them atheists. And they're having an ontological discussion about the existence of something. That thing being God. Now, the second thing you can do is have an epistemological discussion, which is so basically, although my mum says I shouldn't use the word basically, she hates it, but it is essentially to just say, we're going to put a circle around the conversation about whether or not God exists, and we're going to not necessarily talk about if the answer is true or false, but whether or not it's possible to have that knowledge. Yeah? So is it possible to know? If it's true or false? Now, controversial opinion coming up. So when it comes to this discussion, the atheist is allied with the theist against the agnostic. So insofar as atheism is defined as this, you have, so here's the ontology discussion. So and we'll put a circle in that. And that's X, and we'll just say this is X here. Yeah? So the God exists is X. Yeah, so X is either true or false. This is the theist. This is the atheist. Now, these people in this category believe it's possible to know the answer to this question, that God exists. The theist obviously thinks that the statement, the proposition that God exists is true, and that can be known, and so you should incline to it. And the atheist, by use of this definition, believes that statement, that proposition, is false, and so that it is not possible to know. It is not possible that God exists, that God does not exist. So they think this is something that can be discussed. Now, the agnostic sits over here, epistemology, and wants to have an epistemological discussion. And they disagree with a new statement. We'll just call this statement, we can think of a letter, we'll just call it A. So the statement A, or proposition A, which is, it is not possible. It is not possible to know the truth value of X. So that would be the hard agnostic. Or they make a little a, we'll call it, a little a claim, which is I do not know the truth value of X. So this is the hard agnostic. This is the soft. Yeah. So don't worry about them, because that's the more personal claim. But these are making a claim. The hard agnostic is saying this discussion, both the theist and atheist are incorrect in claiming that they can assign a truth value. So now, with regards to A, or proposition A, which is, it is not possible to know the truth value of X, with regards to proposition A, you have two positions. You have the agnostic, or the hard agnostic, which says that this is true. This statement here. Let me change the color of it. Yeah, so this statement here is this. Yeah. So let me know in the chat, by the way. I'm going to have a look now. Let me know in the chat if you're following or if this is a little confusing. I'm trying to make it simple, but I am aware that I may get a few people confused with what's going on here. But I'm hoping you're following. Yeah, I am trying to explain this as simply as I possibly can. But the agnostic, the hard agnostic, says that the proposition A is true. However, the atheist and the theist both agree and say that proposition A is false. So the atheist, in this sense, disagrees with the agnostic and agrees with the atheist. They say that it is possible to know the truth value of X. It is possible to know the truth value of X because they both assign a truth value. The theist assigns truth to that proposition and the atheist assigns falseness. They both assign a truth value to the claim X. They think it is possible to know the answer to that. Yeah? Me, as a Muslim, my family as Christians, we all assign the truth value T, or truth, to proposition X. My atheist friends or people that I've had to discuss with that are atheist in this sense, or marshmallow, or whatever you want to call them, yeah, there are people that make the claim that that statement is false. Yeah. So that they agree with the theist that you can know what the answer to this proposition is. Whereas the agnostic is disagreeing with both of them and claiming he's having an epistemological discussion now. He's talking about the possibility of knowledge. So there's a shift from this conversation here. So you can see the shift here is from this conversation over to this epistemological one. There's two different conversations. The atheist and the agnostic, they may be allies in the sense that they think that the theist isn't justified. Yeah, they both agree the theist is wrong. Yeah, the only difference is the atheist believes that the statement is false, and the agnostic or the hard agnostic doesn't think that you can justify making that claim. You can't know if God exists or not. Maybe God does exist, but we are limited. There may be a number of justifications. We're limited. The arguments that atheists put forward all fail. X, Y, and Z. Yeah, that's the hard agnostic. That the atheist hasn't given a good justification to deny the existence of God. Yeah, the atheist hasn't given a good argument for the existence, for the non-existence of God. But they also believe that neither has the theist. The theist has not made a good case that's convinced them enough to believe in the existence of a God either. So there is a distinction. And these people exist. Yeah, there are people in all of these camps. And we need a name for each of them. And I think that the definitions I use are most helpful in making that distinction clear. Because number one, this is historically how the terms were used. Atheism is a bit of a new word. But if you read the literature with regards to the philosophy on this, agnosticism is related to a discussion on epistemology, on knowledge, gnostic. Yeah, it comes from the Greek word to know. And atheism is here the negation of theism. The A, typically in Greek, was used as a negating factor for that which followed it. Yeah. So the agnostic, some of you maybe have heard of the Gnostics. The Gnostics were those who sought knowledge. The agnostic is the one who does not have knowledge. Yeah, it's the negation of Gnosticism. Atheism is the negation of theism. So if you have a proposition, yeah, atheism is negating that in that sense. Now, this is how I define my terms. Lacktheism, for me, is just laziness. So this is, and we're going to get into that, this is an attempt to avoid any burden of proof. Another spicy topic, but that's what this is. People want to make claims, but they don't want to have to justify them. And theists do this as well, by the way. So even maybe in that sense, we could possibly refer to some theists as lack-theists, or lazy theists. And it's just essentially, it's like, I just lack belief. Yeah. The atheist form of that is, I lack belief in God. I just lack belief in your religion. The theist form of that would be, I just lack belief in your atheism. I don't think you should be either. And again, I am going to get into that in a moment, but the lacktheist is just like a psychological condition. And it's a way to just avoid having to justify your propositions and to constantly just expect your opponent to have to prove everything they say, while you yourself, you just can make claims, and you don't need to give any good reasons to incline people towards them, despite the fact that you think other people should also be lacktheists, that you think other people should lack belief in X proposition. And that is, you believe in a proposition, yeah, that you should or shouldn't do something, and you want to convince others that they should or shouldn't do something. The lacktheist here thinks that the theist shouldn't be a theist, that they should also be like them and give up their religion. Yeah, and they should be giving reasons for that justify that move, or justify that inclination to that which ought to be done or ought to be believed. Now, so what we've got here is we've got the theist. So the theist, and we have the atheist, and they both involve themselves on the discussion about God's existence, and it's quite clear which one by now inclines to what. And then you have the agnostic, and so the soft and the hard forms of that. So we'll do A and little a, and this is on not possible to know. Either collectively or individually. And then you have the lacktheist, which I just call lazy. Simply lacks belief. Now, I'm going to hold something controversial even here. I think each of these have a burden of proof. If they want others to believe or do something. Yeah. Now, this is where we now move on to argumentation. Now, argumentation isn't necessarily a negative thing. Let me just check the comments, actually. So there's like 15 of you here now. How are you all? Have you followed this so far? Are you getting it? Yeah, so we've discussed semantics, how it's arbitrary. I'm choosing to use words this way. You don't have to use them this way. I just think this is the most helpful way to use each of these words, because it makes different groups clearly distinct from one another, because they are distinct for different reasons. And that your insistence on using the word atheism for these other groups just causes confusion, and then when, like, for example, if I'm ever critiquing what I refer to as atheism, people always think I'm attacking them when they don't hold the beliefs of an atheist, when they are agnostic. And so they feel like I'm strawmanning them when I'm not even talking to them. I refer to them as agnostic. So if I'm refuting agnosticism, or if I'm engaging with agnosticism and talking about the degree to which it's justified, that's a different conversation for a different person. And when agnostics watch things and discussions about, what things that I've said against atheists, that is, people that specifically believe the proposition God exists is false, they think I'm attacking them. And it's because they don't understand how argumentation works, or how definitions work, and semantics, and the nature of semantics, and how it is somewhat arbitrary. It doesn't really matter. Call it what you want. Yeah, you don't like the way I use it, don't use it that way. But you can, if you understand how I define terms, you can engage with me. Yeah, you can engage with me, and we can have a conversation. Now, argumentation is not just the thing that husbands and wives do from time to time, or brothers and sisters, or aunties and uncles. It's specifically, in philosophy, a means by which you try to convince someone to believe or do something. Yeah, so argumentation, a means by which you try to convince someone to do or believe something by use of argument. Yeah, and an argument is specifically a conclusion, or an argument is a list of propositions. So an argument is a list of propositions. The one at the end is a conclusion, so it includes a conclusion. And the conclusion, specifically, is that which should be believed. Or done. Now, I'm not pulling this out my hat. The saying is in English usually something else, but I'm making this PG friendly. So I'm not just pulling this out of my hat. Yeah, if you check on books on this, you will see specifically what I'm saying here. So one I'm going to recommend in particular is going to be this one. So Critical Thinking, a Concise Guide by Tracy Bauer, Robert Cohen, Gary Kemp. There may be a later edition. I think this is the 5th edition. Yep, 5th edition. I also have the 4th edition. Doesn't matter. They're both pretty good. There's just minor changing. Introducing arguments. Identifying conclusions. So beginning to recognizing what an argument is. Page 7. Yeah, so we do many things with language, both written and spoken. State a fact, ask a question, tell someone to do something, insult someone, praise someone, promise to do something, swear an oath, make a threat, tell a story, recite a poem, sing a song, say a character's line in a play, cheer a football team on. You will have noticed that in this book we write about attempts to persuade. Yeah, and this is what is being emphasized here. Yeah, attempts to persuade. Attempts to persuade by argument and by other means. As we've mentioned, not all attempts to persuade using language are attempts to persuade by argument. Some are attempts to persuade by means of rhetorical devices. In chapter 2, we'll discuss this, so on and so forth. But for the time being, we'll just make some remarks about rhetoric in general. But we can skip that because we're going to talk about arguments. So introducing arguments, those who try to persuade. Yeah, so here we go. So an argument, a set of propositions. What a crap line that was. So a set of propositions of which one is a conclusion and the remainder are intended to support the conclusion. Yeah, so a set of propositions of which one is a conclusion and the remainder are premises intended as support for that conclusion. A proposition is just the factual content expressed by declarative sentence on a particular occasion. The same proposition may be expressed by different sentences. For example, her name is Sheila expresses the same proposition as she is called Sheila. Or the Schnee is weiß is the same proposition as the snow is white. One is German, the other is English, but they're the same proposition, uttered with different sentences, but the meaning is the same. So this is what an argument is. Yeah? An argument is an attempt to persuade. Now, some people just have opinions, and they just say things. Like, they may just say, God doesn't exist. That in and of itself is just a statement. It's not an argument. Now, if you don't think I should believe that, and if you do not think I should make the statement that that is true, then you're not going to engage in argumentation. You're just giving an opinion. And you're like, I don't really care what you think. Yeah, you just don't believe in God. And you're not really bothered if people agree with you or not. You're not engaged in that discussion. However, if you think that I should also be someone of that ilk, of that inclination, I'm going to ask you to give me reasons for why that proposition is true. Now, it may be that you will claim one of two of these positions, or all, or three, or both, or however many. You may just make an ontological claim. You may say, God doesn't exist. Yeah? God doesn't exist. That's why you should be an atheist. Or that's why you shouldn't be a Muslim. Or that's why you shouldn't be a Christian. Because God does not exist. You should not believe in God, because there are good arguments to say that the existence of a God is absurd. And they have their arguments, whether it's they're claiming that the universe is eternal and therefore doesn't need a God, whether they say the attributes of a God are contradictory and therefore a God can't exist, blah, 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 blah. Whether they're physicalists, they believe everything is just the natural world and that everything is just atoms and energy and there is no consciousness at the bottom of it. If they're making claims and they're putting forward conclusions and they think you should believe this too, then they are required to give an argument. That is justification. They can do this, but they don't have to. Yeah? Note in point. They don't have to if they don't want to convince you. Yeah? But if you want someone to move from one position to another, you've got to give them good reason. You've got to give them premises which justify and link to the conclusion in a sound way. That is, that the premises that you give are true and the argument is logical. There is a logical connection between the premises and the conclusion. So an argument is a list of propositions. It includes a conclusion, which is that which is to be believed or done. Yeah. So it could be You say, you should tidy your room. And I say, why? And you say, because, it's dirty. You could get ill. It's going to be harder to find stuff. Blah, 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 blah. You could list out all of these reasons why I should do something, why I should act, why I should go and tidy my room. If you tell me that I should support Palestine or Israel, you're telling me to do something. And sometimes the actions are also, they entail belief, i.e. the belief that the Palestinians are in the right, or the belief that the Zionist state is in the right or in the wrong, or whichever. Yeah, you're trying to convince people of a conclusion. And if you want to convince them, you've got to give them premises. So it includes an argumentation, includes premises. Premises. I can't even remember how to spell premises. Premises. My brain has absolutely melted. 1 second. Premises. You know when you say a word so long that it stops seeming like a word? Premises. That just looks weird now. Includes premises, which are justification, for the conclusion. Justification for the conclusion. Right, I'm just going to check, are you all following? Spoiling us with these lives. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, I'm good. Good communication tool. Alhamdulillah. Why would you point that out? I hadn't noticed till you said it. Point what out? What did I point out? That one was in a cat. Oh, yeah. Yeah, sorry about that. Cool, just carry on, don't worry about it. But what about the lack of belief in God definition? I might fall asleep as it's late here. Don't worry. I'm going to leave it up so you can watch it. No. Okay. Thanks for your contribution, Zach. It probably will be past experience, no promises. Yeah, I'm going to leave it on. Someone mentioned it earlier, but Shu'aib Ahmed Malik's paper on this is very good. Define it. I've not read that yet, but I'll check that out, inshallah. It can be found FRPR. Anyone can to read. What? It can. I'm guessing that's supposed to say it can be found for anyone to read for free on his academia.edu page. Bro, if this is going to be a class, then you should have prepared a PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so don't watch it. Like I say, this is going to be turned into a class. That's what I said at the very beginning. This is me hashing out my ideas to prepare to make this something formal, which will be turned into slides and then made into a course. I mentioned that right at the beginning. If you find it boring, zone off, put something else on. It's not a problem. I won't be offended. How popular is the Lacktheism definition in contemporary philosophy? Not popular at all. People don't use this outside of YouTube. They've started sort of wiggling their way into it just because it's become such a popular term. But typically in philosophy, atheist is understood to mean an inclination towards a particular truth value that is false with regards to the statement God exists. Sustheist, where sus is short for suspended judgment. That's another nice way of referring to it. It's better this way because we can follow along instead of being presented with a bunch of writing on a slide. Yeah, it gives you time to absorb the information, I guess. Some people are a bit more patient than others. Some people like the slides better. Inshallah, tune in again once it's been turned into a proper presentation. Makes sense. Yes. Okay, alhamdulillah. I'm following. Wa alaykum salam. And you as well. Love you too. For the sake of Allah. Rootledge is selling the 5th edition on their website. Okay, so you can get them on Amazon as well. You can pick them up secondhand. I recommend getting them secondhand. There's no point buying a brand new one. Okay, 100. Wa alaikum salam. Sounds like EP. I don't know what EP is. Sounds like promises. Premises. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Ignore Zach. Well, it's not ungrateful. I get it. Like, I don't like watching people write stuff. I'm probably in the same boat as Zach. I don't think I'd watch this video if I was not making it myself. This is not about being ungrateful. It's just about wanting things summarized, and it feels sometimes like a waste of time writing things down. But I just wanted to get some notes. This is going to be nice because this is going to be notes I can use to turn into slides. This is just helping me. And I guess you can see how I'm hashing an idea out while I'm doing it. I can maybe even put these notes into PDF format, upload them, and put the link to these notes in the chat or in the description or both. So you can download them and look at them yourself as well. Inshallah. Yeah, inshallah, I hope to. I'm going to mention it to Hamza and see if he's up for it. Inshallah, I do want to do streams more often. Agreed. Okay, so we've got a comment here. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. What about if an atheist argue that logic just exists within universe? You cannot prove to exist outside of the universe because the creator is supposed to be outside of the universe. So logic isn't a thing. So it's not like a creation. Logic is just a way by which you relate premises to conclusions. So it's relational. Yeah. So if I'm saying an argument, premise 1, all men are mortal. Premise 2, Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. So logic is just in this, that this has a connection to that. That's what logic is. That it follows. Yeah. Something isn't logical if it doesn't follow. So, for example, with regards to God, either he exists or he doesn't exist. It can't be the case that the statement God exists is true and false. Yeah, this isn't possible. It can't be the case that it is neither. Maybe a better way of doing this is this. So it is neither true or false. Yeah, it can't be true and false, and it can't be not true and not false. It has to be either true or false. Has to be one or the other. God either exists or he doesn't. The universe is either on its own or it was created. Yeah, it's either on it. Sorry, it either was created or it wasn't created. It either was created or it wasn't created. It can't be the case that it's both. Yeah, either there is something that exists outside of the universe or there isn't. Yeah, it can't be both or neither. It has to be one or the other. This is just what we mean about logic, is that it's absurd to suggest otherwise. Yeah? So you got like the law of the excluded middle is just to say that something, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to go into all of this because it's just going to open another Pandora's box. But that's what it is. So when it comes to talking about the laws of logic, quote unquote, don't exist or they only exist within the universe, it's completely overlooking what the laws of logic are. Yeah, it doesn't make sense to say that they don't apply universally. It's because they're fundamental with regards to existence. It's not something that exists outside and that governs. It's just what we're talking about when we're referring to argumentation, that the premises follow or lead to the conclusion. Because like if they're going to say that fundamentally what gave rise to the universe is anti-logic, then there's what they're essentially saying is that what we refer to as logic is rooted in something that isn't itself logical, which means that the logic could be illogical as well. Because think about it. What we're referring to as logic then, if it is rooted in something chaotic, there's no reason for the logic to persist. Because it's rooted in something chaotic. So what we consider logical today could become illogical tomorrow. There's no reason why the logic should even exist in the universe either, if its foundation is itself illogical or anti-logic. Yeah, it's like if it exists here, then it exists. It's a thing. Yeah, we can't say that God does exist and doesn't exist at the same time. We can't say that God is the necessary being or the self-subsistent and that he isn't these things at the same time. You can't make both of these claims. Do it with Hamza, inshallah. He's a busy man. But we'll see. Wa alaykum salam wa rahmatullah. New to the channel. Jazakallah khair for joining. Make sure to like and subscribe. Logic cannot come about without numbers. So I'm not sure about that. Numbers cannot come about without language. Language cannot come about without logic. So logic and numbers are two separate things. Logic is about the connection between premises. So there's nothing about numbers. Like you could talk about logic even before we start counting. Even if we hadn't yet invented numbers or started counting things, you could talk about whether or not that argument makes sense. You don't need to number them. You could put letters instead. A, B, C. That just seems like a strange statement. Wa alaykum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Now you're just saying incomplete sentences. Because logic is mathematical. No, mathematics is logical. Or mathematics follows logic. It's the other way around. So when it comes to math, or the use of numbers, saying this and this equal that, is to do with the fact that there is a connection between the things that come before the equal sign and the things after. It's to do with connections. But that exists before the numbers. Like you can't do maths without the logic. And then you add numbers to logic and you can do maths. Or instead of numbers, you can add premises and statements of fact or propositions, and then you've got argumentation, or you've got philosophy. You've got something that is not necessarily mathematical. Whether you're talking about all men are mortal. So it's not that logic is mathematical; it's that mathematics is logical. What happened to Tap? We all just got very busy. It was difficult to rendezvous at the same time, and we covered quite a lot of topics. As well. No, hey. Can you demonstrate that? How is it if X then Y, X therefore Y, mathematical in any sense that is different from logic itself? Sorry, let me rephrase it. I meant every reasonable argument presented it cannot be applied to God. Did he say something else? Oh, okay, that was your comment before. Sorry, let me rephrase it. I mean, every reasonable argument presented it cannot be applied to God because God is not inside the universe. It's irrelevant whether God is inside or outside of the universe. Logic is not about being something created inside of the universe. Logic is just about the connection between premises. It's not an object. It's not like this cup. It's not a thing. It's a relation between statements of truth, between points of knowledge. This piece of knowledge and this piece of knowledge lead to this one necessarily. Try writing a program without numbers. What you're just saying things now. What's that got to do with whether or not logic is maths? Yeah, the relations. It's not necessarily that relations don't exist. That there will be relations. So there could be like this, gives rise to this. But then randomly at some other point it could give rise to, not be, or the opposite. And then another point in time it could give rise to something completely different. It's just there's no consistency. So like, if it's fundamentally chaotic, there's no laws of logic. There's no, there's no consistency whatsoever. Then you could like literally, it's just random. Everything is random. But then even what we look at now and are referring to as logical, then wouldn't necessarily be. 1 equals true, 0 equals false. That's just semantics. And as we mentioned at the beginning, semantics is arbitrary. We represent statement of truth. It could also, rather than talking about true or false, in terms of programming, 1 means on, 0 means off. So it doesn't necessarily have to relate to truth or falseness. It just means either it's in, I don't know how it works exactly in a chipboard, but either it's got a current in it or it doesn't, I think. Either it's on or it's off. So it's not necessarily related to truth or falseness within a program. But semantically, you could decide 1 stands or it sits in the place for 1. So you could say, premise 1, and then just say 1, premise 2, and then represent it. And this is your way of, instead of putting T or F, you can put 1 and 0 because it's just a symbol and it could mean whatever you decide for it to mean. It's a bit unhelpful if no one else does that. Like if I decide that from now on, whenever I'm going to talk about whether or not something is true, I'm going to draw a sausage. And then whenever I'm talking about something is false, I'm going to draw a donut with sprinkles on. And those will now mean truth and false. So if I'm talking to someone in a debate and he makes a claim, premise 1, and he says something, the sky is blue, I'll just shout, sausage! Yeah, like, so long as you know what I mean when I'm shouting sausage, you could shout sausage. You could shout 1. You could shout true. Or I could shout donut. Or 0. Or false. Doesn't matter, yeah? It's just a noise or a symbol, and we communicate and we agree what that symbol means, and then we continue to use it. It's annoying when people use things that in a way that they're not typically used, but it's possible. Yeah? And there's no reason why you can't, for the sake of argument, just agree on a definition for something. But I feel like you're having a different conversation with us. Logic and math are 2 sides of the same coin. So math is something that can make use of logic. So you have numbers, you have language, and these things are related. One's to do with counting, the other to do with meaning or communication. And there can be a relation between them, and they both use logic. They're not the same thing. Yeah, maths is not the same thing as logic. Maths uses logic. Logic is proof of a true statement. So logic is not a proof in and of itself. Logic is the statement that there is a connection between one statement and other statements. So logic is specifically related to the connection between premises and the conclusion, or a connection between the propositions. So you have a list of statements, and if logic is present, you're saying, yes, this follows from that. So here, this argument, we've got all men are mortal. Yeah, so we could say all this this. We could do it with color. We could write a letter in there, so we could say all X's are A's. Oh, that's really bad. All X's are A's. And then we draw another connection. So then we say Socrates is a man. So now we've got a connection between premise 1 and premise 2 here. Yeah. So there's a connection between those two. And then we say Socrates, yeah, which draws a connection between the conclusion and premise 2. And then we say he is immortal. And that draws a connection between the conclusion and premise 1. And so we've made this sort of connection. So we could say that red is connected to green. Green is connected to blue. Therefore, blue is connected to red. Yeah, or if you like writing rather than colors, you could say X is connected to Y, Y is connected to Z. Therefore, Z is connected to red. Yeah, so you could, rather than writing it out like that, what you're saying is that red is connected to blue. And you're drawing that connection explicitly. Because if you just say Socrates is mortal, someone could say, how do you know that? And then so you say other statements that people accept as true that draw connections and make it more explicit. Yeah, and then you could say, well, X is a Z. Yeah? That's what logic is. Logic is about whether or not there is connections between these things. It's talking about these arrows, whether or not they exist. Yeah, it's not the proof itself. The proof are the premises. The premises are true or false. And if it's logical and it has true premises, then the conclusion must be true. If this is true, and this is true, and it is logically sound, yeah, or it is logically valid, sorry, then it's impossible for this to be false. If this is a valid argument, and it is, because it takes the form of all X's, I think it's modus ponens, all X's are Y's, Y, all X's are Y's, Z is a Y, therefore therefore Z is an X. Yeah. All X's are Y's, Z is a Y, therefore Z is an X. So it's valid. And if it is valid and these statements are true, then that must be true as well. Yes, all math is logic, but not all logic is math. So, yeah, exactly. Cannot prove a true statement without logic. You're saying things now that we know, because to prove a true statement, you have to use an argument, and if you're using argument, you're going to be using logic. No, I don't know why you're saying that. Like we said something that disagrees with that. You cannot have logic without math. You can. You can have logic. You can't have math without logic, but you can have logic without math. Yeah, I don't understand what's going on here. There are semantic rules that language must follow. I've studied logic formally at university, so I know a little bit about logic too. Words can be translated to numbers. Okay, numbers can easily be tested in a logical statement. The fact that you've written programs doesn't mean you aren't wrong about maths being the same as logic. You have to show that, not just state it. If A equals 1, then true, else false. Alright, I think we're talking about something completely different now. Yeah, so, burden of proof. Who is the burden of proof on? Now, yeah, so this is the next thing we're talking about. Or the last thing we're talking about, burden of proof. How long have we been going? An hour. So the burden of proof is specifically on the one who makes a claim and wants someone else to incline to the same claim. Yeah. So the burden of proof is on someone who wants to convince someone else to believe I before E accepts us to C. Believe, although that rule isn't always the case. I can never remember. Someone else to believe or do something. Yeah. Now the thing is they always say on the one who makes a positive claim. The one who makes a positive claim. Negatives can be turned into positives. Yeah. You could say X is a positive claim. Yeah, and X could just be God exists. And here, the theist makes the positive claim. Yeah, so the theist says this is true. And the atheist makes a negative claim in this case and says it is false. Yeah. So here you've got positive and here you've got negative. So the theist affirms this statement. The atheist negates it. But yeah, so here that would just be X. This would be not X. But you can, if you wanted to, change it and just say X equals God doesn't exist. Yeah, you could say that. And in this case, X, so the theist would be not X. So the theist would say that this statement is false. So they're making a negative claim. And then the atheist would be the opposite. They would say, no, this statement is true. This proposition is true. Now, you don't have to write it like that. You can do whichever one you want, but you can word statements differently just to make them sound a little bit different, or so that you have to. Either way, yeah, both of these are making an assertion with regards to the truth value of a statement. Yeah, they're making the assertion with regards to the truth value of a statement. Now, neither of these could have the burden of proof if they don't want to convince someone else. If the Muslim doesn't want to do dawah, if the Christian doesn't want to do missionary work, if the atheist doesn't really give a crap, they're not bothered whether you believe or not, and they don't want to convince you, then they don't have a burden of proof. If they just utter a statement, God doesn't exist, if by that they just mean, I don't believe God exists, and they don't mean you should also not believe God exists, because they're not really bothered for whatever reason. Maybe it's too complex, maybe they can't be bothered, maybe they're not at the time. Blah, 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 blah. Doesn't matter. Yeah, it doesn't matter. If neither of them care, if a Muslim and a theist are together, sorry, a Muslim and a theist and an atheist are together, and neither of them want to convince the other that what they believe is true, or that either of them should do anything other than just go for a cup of tea and talk about the football, then neither of them has a burden of proof. However, if the Muslim says, you should not be an atheist, or if he says, you should believe in Islam, yeah, then he has a burden of proof. Now, that could be something simple. He might not be that complex a guy, and he might just give that person a Quran and say, this is a proof. You should read this. Inshallah, if you're sincere, Allah will guide you. And I think this contains everything you need to know about Islam, and if you read it, Allah will guide your heart, and then so on and so forth. So you could be a simple person and just do something like that. Or you could give them argumentation. You might go into a dependency argument, or a design argument, or this argument, or that argument. You may give them arguments against other positions. You might argue against atheism and explain to them why atheism is absurd. You might argue against why Christianity and all the other religions are absurd. You might go about it by many different ways. But you're giving them reasons to reject things that are... you should be giving them reasons, good reasons, to reject things that go against Islam. For example, you should not be a Christian because of X, Y, Z. Yeah, so you give them that reason, or you shouldn't be an atheist because of X, Y, and Z. And you give them that, and then that means that closes the door to this ideology or to that ideology. And the idea is you keep doing that, and then also you give them good reasons to accept Islam as the truth, that the propositions it makes, that God exists, that God is one, that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the last and final messenger, and that the Quran is the revelation given to him by God. Yeah, you give them reasons to believe in these things, and that God is worthy of worship. So you convince them by means of propositions, and you will have a burden to do something along them lines. You can either do that yourself, or you can ask the Quran to do it, and well, not ask the Quran to give it. You can expect the Quran to do it by just giving them the revelation and let God talk to them himself via that revelation. Or you could point them in the direction of da'is that are engaged in that constantly, like all of the YouTube channels. You could tell them to jump on there, or to book a meeting with the Lighthouse Project, or to do this, or to do that, or whatever. Yeah. That might be your means of getting them to be convinced. And then other people, if you yourself are not prepared, other people can engage them in a conversation and give them reasons. Yeah. So you're giving them reasons to believe either directly or indirectly. Yeah. Either you do it yourself, or you employ something else to give them those reasons on your behalf. I.e. the book, Quran, or a da'i, someone who is engaged in that. Now the atheist, if they are not bothered, if they don't think you should believe in atheism, or that you should leave Islam, if they don't think you should do anything, or if they don't think you should believe anything, and they're not really that bothered, they don't want to get in that conversation, then they have no burden of proof. Yeah. Now, this is the thing. Both people can have a burden of proof, and neither can have a burden of proof. It depends on the intention of the people involved in the discussion. So, if someone is stating that this statement is true or this is false, both of these people are to engage in a discussion if they think that it is true or it is false. Or you can put this to the side and you could have a discussion on epistemology about whether it's possible to know whether or not this statement is true or false. And you might say, I've looked at both of them and neither really justifies. So I don't think you can say that God does exist, but I also don't think you can say that God doesn't exist. We have to suspend judgment on this proposition because we do not have good reasons to incline either way. Yeah. But then you have a burden of proof as well, because now you're making the claim that the theist hasn't done a good job and the atheist hasn't done a good job. So the job now is double. Yeah, because the job is to both refute theists and show explicitly whether or not they've actually achieved what they claim to achieve, and then to go through them and say, look, they've not actually done it. And you need to show how atheists have not actually achieved a justification for saying that that isn't true. You cannot make the claim that God exists is false, or that God does not exist is true. You're not justified in that either. Now, if you've not done that, and if you've not really engaged in that, you cannot justify a hard agnostic position. Because the whole point of the hard agnostic position is the claim that all attempts to prove this true or false have failed. But in order to show that all attempts to prove it true or false have failed, you've got to go through all of the arguments from both sides and show why they both fail and why you can't incline either way. Now, if you haven't done that, you can fall back on personal agnosticism and just say, well, maybe someone has, maybe it is possible, but personally, I've just not got there yet. I don't know. And I've not, in every conversation I have engaged in, I've not seen either the atheist or the theist make a good case. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm not justified. And with most of the people that I've engaged with, I could say maybe that they're not justified. But I don't know because I've not engaged in every discussion. I've not written a book and conclusively destroyed every argument in favor of both. Yeah. So this is where the burden of proof lies. But if you are trying to convince someone that something is true, that they should believe something, or that something is false, that they should not believe something, you have a burden of proof. You have to show them why they should not believe that thing. And if you give them reasons, yeah, whatever those reasons are, you have given an argument. So if you say, you should believe X, yeah, whatever X is, X can be anything, yeah, and you say you shouldn't believe X or you should believe X, and then you give them reasons. You give them reason number 1. You give them reason number 2. You give them reason number 3. And all of these have a connection and give sufficient reason as to why you should believe or not believe X. Then you have given an argument. And this argument, the premises should be true. Yeah. And they should be logically coherent and they should follow on to the conclusion. There should be a logical connection to the conclusion. Now, if you have done this, you have provided your proof by way of argument, because each of these premises are statements which you believe to be facts, i.e. they are proofs. Yeah? They are proofs. It could be, some of these could contain something about something scientific, some experiment. Yeah, this could be with regards to some sort of universally agreed law. Some law. This one could be about how the counterposition contains absurdities, a contradiction, whatever. Yeah, the proofs could be varied. They could be empirical. They could be hypothetical. They could be blah 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 blah. But these act as your proofs. Yeah, for the argument. And you have given that burden of proof. Now, X could be anything. So it could be the case you think X is you should not be a Muslim. Yeah, or you are not justified in being a Muslim. You shouldn't be a Muslim. Okay, You want me to believe this? Yes. Why? Okay, now, if you give me reasons, yeah, reason 1, reason 2, reason 3, yeah, these are the premises. This is the conclusion. Yeah. And then you're giving me justification. You're giving me the reasons. Now, obviously, if you put it in standard form, you'd put it like premise 1, premise 2, conclusion. Nice and neat. And if there's another premise, you might do premise 3, and then another inference to a further conclusion, conclusion 2. And that could go on, you know, with multiple inferences to some ultimate conclusion at the end. Yeah. Blah, 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 blah. But this would be in standard form. But typically when people give it, if they write a book or if they write a newspaper article and they're trying to convince someone of something, if it's a polemical one, they can put it in any order. They could put the conclusion in the middle. They could give some reasons before it, some more reasons after it. And if you were to neaten it, they might even like add a load of rhetoric in the middle of there as well. And then if you're trying to abstract that and turn it into standard form, you would put the conclusion at the end. And you would draw an inference line so you know where the inference is. You would add its premises. You would maybe add any implied premises that were not explicitly stated. You might go into it a bit more. But this would be your proof. Yeah? This would be your proof. And then, you know, if someone is stating God does not exist, this is a statement which you believe is true. Yeah? If you say God does not exist and you think I should believe it as well, if you think I should say God does not exist, or if you say Islam is false, Islam is not a true religion, yeah, and you believe that the statement, yeah, X, Islam is a false religion, yeah, if you believe this is true, then you've got to give reasons if you want me to believe it as well, or if you want other people to believe it as well. That's how the burden of proof works. Whether it's a positive claim, quote unquote, a negative claim is arbitrary. It's about, do you assign a truth value to any given proposition? And do you think that other people should agree that the truth value you give this proposition is correct? And that they should incline to that same proposition? Whatever it is. Yeah, that's the burden of proof. You don't have to. Yeah, if you don't want to convince us atheism is true, then don't. If you want us to convince you that Islam is true, then yes, we have a burden of proof. Yeah, and it is frustrating when a theist goes, I don't need to prove Islam is true. I don't need to give you any evidence. You could at least, at minimum, give them a Quran. Like, at bare minimum. Yeah, or read them some verses from the Quran. And give them something. Yeah, you need to give them something. If you don't give them anything, because even the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he talked to people. He engaged in conversation. The Quran gives lines of reasons. Yeah, it engages with the person. And if you're not doing that at all, and you're just like, no, you just got to prove that atheism is true, and that's it. And it's only them with the burden of proof, and that somehow makes us correct. Then you would be mistaken as well. We have to give the message. We have to engage in conversation. And use the best argumentation, as the Quran says. We've got to engage with them. We do have a burden of proof. Yeah, even if it's just as little as giving them the Quran or speaking a word, mentioning something at least. You've got to begin somewhere. Yeah. But they can also have the burden of proof if they're engaging in an apologetic discussion. If they are trying to convince you that something is either true or false. This is the point. So, burden of proof. So to conclude what we've discussed today. So first we discussed semantics, how it's somewhat arbitrary. Yeah, you can define things however you want. It's fine, so long as when you're engaging in a conversation, you begin by explaining what your definitions are, and you agree on the terms, and this is how we're going to use it. If someone wants to use atheism in another way, that's fine, just for the sake of moving the conversation forward. We can call them a marshmallow or whatever. Yeah, I would just say, okay, so what word do you want to use for someone who says this? That the statement God exists... Oh, crap. I've got the other thing again. That the statement that God exists is false. What do we name that person? Yeah, I call it an atheist. You want to call it something else. An agnostic atheist. Or a hard atheist. You might want to... So like I've split this up here into soft and hard agnosticism. You might want to use the word hard and soft here in relation to atheism and say that a hard atheist is someone who says God does not exist, and a soft atheist is an agnostic, essentially. You could do that if you wanted. That would be useful. Yeah, at least it makes a distinction between different kinds of atheist. Yeah, I'd even be fine using that. I could happily have a discussion making reference to hard atheist or a soft atheist, and that kind of thing. That's fine. So semantics, arbitrary. We just agree on a definition. We can continue the conversation. This is how I use it because I find it the most helpful this way. Atheism is the one who is in the polar opposite position to the theist. They say God does not exist, and the theist says God does exist. The lacktheist is just someone who quote unquote lacks belief. It's just a description of a psychological state, and that's it. An agnostic is someone who is against both the theist and the atheist, and say you can't say that the statement God exists or the statement God does not exist is either true or false. And then obviously that goes into two forms. So that one that I just mentioned with the hard agnostic, so they make an absolute claim about the ability to attain knowledge for everyone with regards to this statement. And then you have the soft agnostic. It's just someone who's making a personal claim about maybe themselves or a number of people they've engaged with who they don't think are justified. And so there are two forms of the discussion here. So the atheist versus the theist is they're having an ontological discussion about the existence of God. And then the atheist and the theist, to a certain degree, would be allied against the agnostic insofar as they disagree with a different statement that the agnostic is making. And the agnostic is making a claim, by the way. They are making the claim A here, as I've written it, which is to say it is not possible to know the truth value of X. That is a proposition that they believe to be true if they're a hard agnostic. And that is itself, if they want to convince other people that agnosticism is the correct position to hold, that is something that requires justification or proof. The soft agnostic might even also be required to give proof, because it could be the case that they don't have, that they're not justified in being a soft agnostic, that they have been presented sufficient evidences and they may be rejecting it for other reasons. A soft agnostic could be a soft agnostic out of laziness, out of arrogance. It's not to say every one of them are, because you may get a soft agnostic who is sincere, for example, and inclines to the belief in God later on in life. There's lots of cases of that. Reverts that begin with atheism, move to agnosticism, and then later submit and take their shahada. Yeah, so you do have that transition from one to the other, and the soft agnostic here would never take shahada if there wasn't some element of sincerity in them. So that there can be this transition between them, and it's not the case that every soft agnostic is somehow arrogant or insincere or whatever. There could be sincerity in them still, and that they could be justified in a soft agnostic position to some degree, because of the life that they've lived, or because of confusion that they've been subjected to, or because of their IQ. You know, they may find it difficult to reason. They may have mental insufficient rational capacity to be able to engage in discussions. There's lots of things, yeah, that could be justifying, quote unquote, to a certain degree, someone's soft agnosticism. But again, if they are not justified, if they have been given it, they do understand it, but then because of arrogance, they reject it anyway. It may be the case that they're not justified in being a soft agnostic. And so we might ask, the soft agnostic, we could write it In another way, we could say, okay, so because you've got to remember, we believe in the fitrah. Yeah, so the Muslims, and I guess even the Christians, they would say in their own way, the atheist isn't justified, or the agnostic isn't justified in their agnosticism, because obviously we believe that there is a God, and that God is even self-evident. For example, that we have things like the fitrah, and so you should have a natural inclination towards the belief in God. And if you do fall into agnosticism in any form, or atheism in any form, that there's something that's gone wrong on your journey in life, and that you've been led down an incorrect path somewhere. And so we might then say, okay, if this is true, what we believe is true, then something has gone wrong here. And so you cannot be justified in that. And then we would say, okay, so why do you hold that position? Because you're now saying a different claim. X might be, we'll say X. So the soft agnostic is saying X, and X is that it is true that I am justified in being a soft agnostic. Yeah, they at least believe that for themselves. And even if they're not engaging in a discussion with other people, I think they should be concerned as to whether or not they are in fact justified in being a soft agnostic. If they do think they are, they don't necessarily need to prove that to anyone else. That could just be a personal thing. They want to keep it to themselves. They don't want to engage in a conversation about it. That's fine. But then you should at least justify it to yourself. I am just, and they could justify it in a simple way, and they could just say, well, I'm justified because of lacktheism, yeah, because I've not been given any reason to believe otherwise. Yeah, I've got all of these religions put in front of me, and I've not had time to go through them, and I can't for the life of me pick. That could be justification. I might say, yes, you are justified in being an agnostic in this case. Someone who was raised in, somewhere in Northern Ireland, and there's these disputes between the Catholics and the Protestants, and they're just really confused, and they're like, there's all of this stuff, and there's just all this trauma that they've gone through, and their head's just pickled, and they've got life worries, and they've just been given all of that, and they go, no, I reject this. I'm not got anything to do with that. And they've just heard about Islam on the news, or they've just heard about Buddhism in some film, and they just have this vague idea of what each of these things are. And at that point, they don't know anything about them beyond what the news has told them or popular media has told them. And with that information alone, they haven't really got a good reason to move towards any one of them in particular at that point in time. That could be a justification for that. That doesn't mean they should stay in that. It might mean, okay, so now maybe you should look into them a bit more. Maybe there's other ways of dealing with it. Like, do you have to look into every religion on the planet, for example? Are there ways of grouping them and thinking about them in a way that doesn't take too much time, so that you can write off a number of them? Like, for example, polytheism versus monotheism versus atheism. You could group things into categories like that. If this category is absurd, you don't need to take into consideration anything in that category anymore. You don't need to look into polytheism if it's innately absurd, or if you decide and you look into it and blah 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 blah, and you look at it and you think monotheism is absurd because of X, Y, Z. Obviously, I disagree with that. But if you came to that conclusion, then you would just wipe your hands of monotheistic religions and you wouldn't look into them anymore. I don't think you can do that. I think that if you were to go through this, the categories that you would have to wipe off would be things like polytheism, deism, tritheism, or Trinitarianism, although they're not necessarily the same thing. I don't think any of these, or atheism, I don't think these positions are justified. And so I think there are ways of writing each of these categories off. But I don't think you can write off monotheism. And so then you would have to take into consideration the monotheistic religions and look into them and to see whether or not they are justified in their claims, whether or not they have anything And that doesn't necessarily have to take a lifetime. It could be something relatively quick. What time is it? Oh, blimey heck, it's past 12 o'clock now. So, I've said a lot. I'm going to wrap up now. We're going to leave it at that. So we've discussed semantics, how that works, definitions, things like that. What is argumentation? Argumentation in the sense that you provide an argument, which is a number of premises that lead to a conclusion. There's a logical connection between them, that the premises are true. And because the premises are true and there is a logical connection between the premises and the conclusion, therefore the conclusion must also be true, and the argument is referred to as a sound argument. A sound argument is exactly that. It has two qualities. A sound argument has true premises and it is logically valid. It is a valid argument. It is either deductively valid or inductively valid. There's other forms of validity, so like other ways of arguing, abduction, etc. But the point is that it either absolutely follows with absolute certainty, i.e. it's a deductive argument, so the conclusion is necessarily true, or it is more than likely to be true, inductively valid. So it is above 50% in terms of its truthfulness, or the possibility of it is true. So if you say most dogs are black, Dave has a dog, therefore it is likely that Dave's dog is black, or it is more likely that Dave's dog is black. Or if all other dogs in the world have been killed, apart from one, and all the dogs that are remaining are black, that most of the dogs in the world have been killed and all of them are black apart from one that's white, if you find out Dave has a dog, you'd be justified in saying it is most likely Dave's dog is black. Yeah? But it might be the white dog. It might just be the last white dog on the planet. If that's the case, this would be an inductive argument. But the point is that you're making it clear that the conclusion follows, and that would be a sound argument. And the burden of proof. And the burden of proof is upon the one who makes a claim and wants others to either believe this claim or to do something. It is a call to action or belief. And that belief could be positive or negative. And every positive belief could be changed to a negative one and vice versa. Yeah, you could say that God exists is true, or you could say God does not exist is false. Those are the same proposition. God does not exist is true is the same as saying God does exist is false. Yeah, and the burden of proof is upon the one that wants to convince others that they should also incline to a given proposition. And they therefore then give them reasons in order to do so. And these reasons themselves should be true and should logically follow and connect to the conclusion that they are trying to convince you of. And that is what I have to say on the matter. You may agree, you may disagree. Feel free to leave a comment in the comment section explaining why you disagree, or why you think we should use other definitions, why you think you don't have a burden of proof. I might even agree with you that you don't have a burden of proof for a particular claim, but you may have, because this is the thing, people act as if the only discussion is this one. Yeah, but it's not. With the discussion of religion, this is not the only claim that we discuss. We also discuss other things. We're not just talking ontology. We're not just talking about whether or not something exists, in this case, God. We're also talking about the possibility of knowledge. Yeah, whether or not it's possible to know such things. We are talking about many things. Like, there's lots of things. So your proof, or your burden of proof, might not be to prove that God doesn't exist. An agnostic doesn't have to prove that God doesn't exist. All the agnostic has to do, the agnostic has a different burden to the atheist. The burden for the agnostic is to show that the theist and the atheist fail to show that the statement God exists is either true or false. And so they make this proposition instead. But the agnostic has a burden of proof for this proposition. Oh, I'm not even sharing my screen. Yeah, so the agnostic has a burden of proof for this proposition if they want you to believe this proposition is true as well. Yeah, that's not the same as the ontological discussion. Yeah, but still a burden of proof. The soft agnostic might also have a burden of proof. I think I deleted the other stuff. Yeah, the soft agnostic might have another burden of proof, i.e. proving that they are justified in not inclining to one or the other, that they haven't been presented accurate information. They can't even necessarily articulate the idea. They've not really thought about it. They may, but that might be itself a justification for being an agnostic, and that's a simple burden of proof. They don't. The soft agnostic doesn't need to prove that the statement God exists is false. That's not their burden, because they're not making the claim that God exists is false. They've got a different burden of proof. But when you get into the conversation and we're talking about burden of proof, they act often, and theists act this way as well, and I've seen it happen, as if when we're talking about burden of proof, that we're only talking about the proposition God exists. And that if you're not a theist, that everyone else has to justify the statement that God exists is false, or justify the statement God does not exist is true. But not everyone is having that discussion. And if you are not an atheist in this definition, if you are an agnostic, then I agree. You don't necessarily need to prove the statement that God doesn't exist is true. All you need to prove is that those who claim it is true, or those who claim it is false, that they have failed in that. And so you would go through the arguments and you would show, okay, so they've made this argument here that God exists. This argument fails because of this, this, and this reason. And you give a valid objection to that argument. Or you look at the atheist and the claim that they say is false, God exists is false, and you say, and they make the argument here because of the problem of evil, but this problem fails because of this, this, and this. Or they've made the argument because of the Euthyphro dilemma, but this fails because of this, this, and this. And so each of these claims in favor of the assent or the dissent to a given proposition has failed. And then they have given their burden, but it's not the same burden as the atheist. Or the soft agnostic is just trying to show why they themselves personally are not justified, but they can't talk on behalf of anyone else. Or they can talk about a small group of people that they have engaged with. Hope that makes sense. Inshallah, I hope to turn that into something a bit more formal. I'm going to turn these notes into slides. But I'm hoping that the 28 of you that have been watching have been following along. And enjoying, inshallah. Let's have a look at the comments. Let's have a look at the comments. I'm just going to run through these quickly and I'm going to go because I'm absolutely knackered. And I want to go to bed. So Brother Samadi says, a sword is true. Oh wait, Christ brings a sword is true. Oh, he's asking a question. Is true equals 1 and false equals 0 an inherent property of those numbers, or is it just something we decided to assign to those numbers? This is a good question. Could it be the case that we could say that true equals 0 and false equals 1? The answer to that question is yes. If we wanted to, we could define 1 as false and 0 as true, because these are just symbols that we have arbitrarily decided to represent a given meaning. and it didn't have to be the way round that we chose. So 1 doesn't need to represent true. It could be false. You could use 3. You could say true equals 3 and false equals 5. And you could write those numbers down, and that could be the placeholder. 1 could be, even the number 1 doesn't have to be represented with that line. That number 1 could be represented with a squiggle instead, or a sausage, or a pineapple. These are just symbols which have a meaning, and we arbitrarily decide what these things, or what the placeholder, what the sign, what the symbol is to represent the meaning. Logic leads to denying the Sharia, rejecting hadiths, following desires. It is a destructive and evil idea that should be avoided. I disagree. The ulama, like Ibn Taymiyyah, for example, would disagree. That logic does not lead. Think about this statement. When we're saying logic, again, we're talking about how conclusions follow from given propositions. And what we say is that God exists is true, that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the final messenger, and that the Quran is the word of Allah. That these are true. And if you look into it, you will see these things are true. And the reason is because when you look into it, you're looking at the reasons to believe this is true, and the connection between the evidences, the Quran, the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Sahaba, so on and so forth, and the Quranic arguments themselves, that these give good reason that there is a logical connection between them and the proposition that God exists, that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a messenger, and that the Quran is the word of Allah. That's what logic is. We're saying there is a logical connection, that if the Quran is true and it is from God, and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a messenger from God, and God does exist, then you should be a Muslim. And that conclusion that you should be a Muslim follows from the statement, God exists, and then you have your evidences for God exists. That Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a messenger, and then you have your evidences why Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a messenger. But the Quran is the word of God, and then you have your evidences as to why the Quran is the word of God. These are all reasons to the conclusion that you should then become a Muslim. That's what logic is. Yeah, logic doesn't lead to denying the Sharia. Often the case when people they say logic leads to denying the Sharia, what they're saying is that they're saying, oh, this claim in the Sharia is illogical. And then you say, why? And say, because it seems wrong. Like, for example, the hud punishments, chopping the hand. People just make the claim, they just throw the word out and they say it's illogical. But when you ask them why, half of the time it's just because they don't like it. But that's not logic. That's just a dislike. Or if people, when they're looking at anything, they're looking at a particular series of events that have occurred, they don't like war, they don't like whatever. When they're looking at it, it's often the case, and like I said, I run the Lighthouse Mentoring Project, and I talk to a lot of people from many different backgrounds, many different issues and objections to Islam. And when I scratch the surface and I'm talking to them a bit more, half of them don't even really know what they mean when they use words like good and evil. Half of the objections they have, when I ask them to articulate it, they can't. I have to re-articulate it for them. They don't even articulate it in the proper way. So they'll come and they'll talk about the problem of evil, and they'll express it in form of an emotional rejection rather than a logical one. And I go, that's not the argument from evil. This is the argument from evil. And then I've got to go through what the atheists, or the academic atheists, say, and the argument they make in terms of the presence of evil and how they present it. I say, so is that what you meant? And they go, oh yeah. And so, well, it's funny because you couldn't even articulate that. You didn't know that argument. When I asked you, it turned out because you just thought, oh, but it's scary. Oh, but isn't it obviously evil? And it's like, well, why is it obviously evil? Yeah, why is that necessarily a problem? So no. Yes. No. 1 and 0 are just used to make a certain command happen. So it's not necessarily that true and false. It's binary code. You can make it represent true or false, but again, that's arbitrary. I meant. Yeah, what exactly about what has been discussed here could lead to those things? What are you actually disagreeing with? Good question. Yeah, letters and numbers are related in the fact that they are symbols to represent something. Numbers is specifically related to counting things. But they are different. Like, numbers are not identical to letters. Letters are used to write words. We even use letters to write out numbers in different ways when you want to explain how to say it. And we just write numbers because it's a lot easier to write one digit or a number of digits rather than write out the whole word as well. So there is that connection between them. But there's also things that make them distinct. Typical wimpy response from wimps following quote-unquote logic. Yeah, this is the thing, that logic, okay, if you mean logic, yeah, I agree. It's logic. When people say, oh, but the Sharia is illogical, why is it that men have to grow beards, or why is it that women have to wear hijab? It's illogical. When you speak to them about it, they don't have like a logically deductive argument. It's just that they think, oh, but today is a different kind of day, and like it's not the same as the back in the past, and it's backwards or it's barbaric, and it's like, look, why is it barbaric? Why is it? And then when you go into it in more reason, or you scratch the surface, you ask them to provide a justification for these claims. They don't often have solid justifications. Sausage. All math is logical. Christ brings us sort of just saying things now. I'm getting bored of you now, so I'm just going to ignore your comments. I think a lot of theists' backs must be hurting from taking on everyone's burden of proof when they don't have to. Yeah. But as well, like, it can be the case that we both have a burden. Like, for example, the atheist might claim God doesn't exist. They'd have a burden of proof to prove that. And if I want to tackle that or engage with it, then I have a burden now as well to show how what they've said is false, or how, like, for example, the atheist has let me pull this up. So let's say the atheist claims X. I say you've got a burden of proof because you want me to believe X, yeah, or you want me to do X, whatever X is. And then they go, okay, yeah, fair enough, and they give reasons. They give reason, premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, so on and so forth. Now, if I think that X is wrong, and they've made the effort to show how this proves that, now, I could just not engage with it. I don't have to engage with it. I could walk away and say, I can't really be bothered, to be honest. He's at least like made some effort. Yeah, he may be sincere, he may be insincere. I'm not going to know unless I engage with him a bit more, or if I already am familiar with him and I'm aware of him, and even then maybe I'm mistaken. So there's all these possibilities. You've got to self-reflect and think about the person you're engaging with. But the person has made an effort to bring a burden of proof. They've given you reasons for that proposition which they think you should believe. Yeah. Now, if they present that to me and I want to engage with them, then if I am going to say that this is wrong, X is false, I have now a burden of proof to show how this has failed to prove that. Yeah. So now I need to engage with these reasons, and I can engage with an argument, because this is all of this would be an argument. So this is the conclusion, and these are the premises. Yeah, premise 1, 2, and 3. And there's two ways I can tackle this argument. Number one, I can show how one of these premises or more are false. If one of the premises are false, then even if it's logically valid, because the argument could still be valid, but if one of the premises are false, the argument isn't sound and the conclusion isn't necessarily true. Yeah, because you've got to remember, a sound argument, so a sound argument needs two things. Number one, true premises. And number two, its structure is logically valid. If an argument has true premises and it is logically valid, then it is a sound argument, and the conclusion is necessarily true. Now, an argument can have false premises but still be valid. Yeah? An example of that could be so all cats are purple. A dog is a cat. Therefore, all dogs are purple. This is a logically valid argument. Sounds strange, yeah, but it's valid because it's following the form. Yeah, all x's are y's. Z is an x. Therefore, all z's are y's. Or all b's, all a's are b's. C is an a. Therefore, C is a b. Whatever, like how you can. I'm not probably doing this in the way. Or you could another version. Yeah, that's maybe a bit. Modus ponens is this one, I think. So if I said modus ponens before about something I don't think was. I can't remember the bloody names. I've probably gotten it wrong. But it's neither here nor there. So if A, then B. A, therefore B. This is modus ponens. I'm confident. I may be wrong about this as well. I think this is modus ponens. If A, then B. A, therefore B. Yeah? That is a valid thing. But you could put false things there. So you could say, if the sky is blue, then my foot is green. If the sky is blue, my foot is green. The sky, if the sky, well, rather than blue, if the sky is, the sky can be all the colours, can't it? Is there a colour that the sky can't be? If the sky is brown, I've never seen a brown sky. Maybe there's a brown sky. We live in a possible world where the sky is never brown. If the sky is brown, then my foot is green. The sky is brown. Is brown, therefore my foot is green. All of these things are false. Yeah, the sky isn't brown, and it's not the case that if the sky is brown that my foot goes green. The sky isn't brown and my foot is not green. All of these statements are false. But it is logically valid. It just doesn't have true premises, so it is not a sound argument. Yeah. Now it could be the other case. It could be that something has true premises, but it is not valid. Yeah. So it could be the case that, premise 1, the sky is blue. Premise 2, bananas are yellow or green. This is technically true. Therefore, conclusion, Yusuf is a Muslim. Yeah, so all of these can be true, but it's not valid because there's nothing like, there's no connection between this. So the sky is blue, okay, bananas are yellow. There's no connection between either of these statements. Yeah, you can maybe make an arbitrary one about color. Yeah, rather than that, we could say bananas are soft to get rid of the arbitrary connections. So the sky is blue, bananas are soft. Yeah, so there's no connection at all now between these two. Therefore, Yusuf is a Muslim. Another random statement that has no connection to either premise 1 or premise 2. There's no connection whatsoever. Yeah, so although each of the premises is true, yeah, so it has true premises, it is not logically valid, so therefore it's not a sound argument. Yeah, it's not a sound argument. And so if I'm engaging with the atheist or the agnostic, and they've made the effort to give me a burden, to give me a proof, and they've taken up the burden and they've presented reasons to accept the conclusion they think I should say is true, I could defeat this by showing how one of the premises is false. That could be premise 1, could be premise 2, could be premise 3, it could be 2 of them, or it could be all of them, or just one of them. So if any of them are false, the conclusion does not necessarily follow. Oh, sorry, the conclusion is not necessarily true. The conclusion could still be true. Yeah? So, like, for example, this could be true, this could be true. I could put another premise in there, premise 3. That could be false. I don't know. Superman is strong. Or Superman is weak. Or Superman is real. He's not a real character. Yeah. So that could be false. And the other 2 could be true. But that could still be true. Just because that's false, it doesn't mean the conclusion is false. But in terms of what the argument intends to do, it fails to convince people or give good reason to convince people that the conclusion is true, just because it's valid if the argument is dependent upon all of the premises being true. Yeah, so if you can show any one of those premises are false, then you show that the argument is not a sound argument. Or, yeah, so you could do that. So show that it doesn't have true premises. Or you could show that it is not logically valid, which is to say you could show how it is fallacious in some way. How it's either informally or formally illogical, or formally informally fallacious. That is to say, how either it makes some unjustified inference. So it is making a claim and it's acting as if that conclusion is obvious. Like, for example, so most dogs are black. Dave has a dog. And then they say Dave's dog is black. You can't make that claim. It might not be black. Yeah, you could say every swan I've seen is so every swan I've seen is white. Gary has a swan. Therefore, the swan is white. Or Gary's swan is white. So here, this is true. This is true. Yeah. But this doesn't follow from that. Just because every swan that you have seen is white, that doesn't mean that Gary has a white swan. Because there are black swans that exist. And just because you haven't experienced a black swan, it doesn't mean that they don't exist. Yeah. So you can't make the conclusion that because you've seen loads of swans and all of them have been white, Gary happens to have a swan, you've gotten a piece of information through a telegram or a text message or whatever. It doesn't mean you can now make the conclusion that the swan that Gary has is definitely white. Without a shadow of a doubt. There's no way that it could be any other colour other than white. Yeah, that would be fallacious. Yeah, and the conclusion doesn't follow. Now, it doesn't mean that Gary's swan isn't white. You can't say, no, Gary's swan is black. And you somehow know that because his inference isn't justified. You can't make that claim. But you can at least say that he is not justified in claiming that the swan is white. Yeah? And so that's how you may tackle. Now, you would have a burden in engaging with someone if you want to convince them that this claim is false and that the reasons they give for that do not give good reason to incline towards that belief. Because now you're making a meta claim. Yeah? So the atheist believes X and believes everyone should believe X because of premise 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, that's what he believes. Now you're making a separate proposition, so you can circle that. And if you're a theist here, or an agnostic, or a deist, or whatever, if you're just not an atheist and you think the atheist is wrong, you're making a different claim, X, that this is, rather than X, we'll give a different symbol. You're making a different claim, claim P. And you believe that this is wrong. Ooh. So you believe this is wrong, and you give your reasons. Yeah, so it might be P1, P2, P3. And P stands here for this claim is wrong. Or this atheist justification doesn't do what it intends to do. That could be P. Yeah. And so you might give different premises. So you might say that his argument is invalid. Yeah. You might say that his one or more of his premises are false. Yeah. False. Yeah. You might yourself be fallacious. Some of your reasons may be, he's an idiot. That might be one of your reasons. You might try to use rhetoric. You might fall into a fallacy yourself to try to convince people that P is true. And P here is that the atheist has failed to justify his claim. Yeah, and then there could be another back and forth. So this could be put in another box. Yeah. And then the agnostic could come along. And he could debate and say, I don't know, anything, we'll say, give an A. And he could give his reasons, premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, about why everyone in this discussion is just being stupid. Or why everyone in this discussion fails. It could be the case that he thinks the atheist has failed. And it could be the case he thinks the theist has failed to show why the atheist has failed. He could say, no, the theist has just engaged in ad hominem and he hasn't actually proved that the atheist is wrong. And so the theist failed to do his job. But the atheist has also failed to do his job, because although the theist failed to show that, I can show that. And then they can give proper reasons to show why the atheist is invalid. Yeah, because the theist might just claim it's invalid and not actually explain why. The theist might just claim some of the premises are false, but not really show why. It might be the case that the premises are even true, but he's just saying that they're false because he's panicking or whatever. Yeah. I hope that helps. What is going on here? Belief in God is not logical. So it depends on the person. Some beliefs, because when you're saying belief in God is logical, what you're saying is that there are evidences, yeah, to believe in God. There are good reasons to believe in God. And the proposition God exists, that someone is justified in believing that. If you say belief in God is not logical, you need to be careful, because what that sounds like is that you're saying that the proposition God exists, or if someone says I believe in God, that they are not justified in making that claim. That there are no evidences or reasons to say that God exists is true. And I'm guessing if your name is Christ brings a sword, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that you don't believe that. Yeah, I'm gonna go out on a limb and think that you think that Scripture. Actually, you've said it here. You think Scripture offers that reason. With Scripture, the conclusion, God exists, or I believe God exists, is justified. What you're saying there is that with Scripture, belief in God is justified and therefore logical. I don't hope rewatch this video from the beginning and just go through it slowly and think about what I've just said. Because if that's what logic is, if logic is just that you have evidence to justify a belief, and that belief is God exists, or your belief that Christianity is true, or the belief that Jesus is your Lord and Savior, yeah? If you think there are good reasons to believe this, then you do think that is logical. Yeah? If you think it's illogical, what you're essentially saying is there's not a good reason to believe that Christianity is true. Think about what you're saying. Don't just throw things about. You know what? Why? I'm going to take a massive stab in the dark here. But I'm going to guess the reason he says that is because of things like the LPT. Because of things like the logical problem of the Trinity. That because there are clear-cut problems with Trinitarian claims, unless they invent new definitions for the word is, and they just go off the typically understood usage of the word is, when they say Jesus is God, the Father is God. If they're using either the is of identity or the is of predication, and they don't invent this third one, if they use either of these, it leads to a contradiction, and so they have to throw logic out the window and go, ooh, it's mysterious. Because it's a clear-cut contradiction if you say either one of the case. If you use the is of identity, then you fall into the heresy of modalism, and you are outside of the folds of Christianity, because you cannot say there is only one person. The is of identity necessitates there is only one person, so you cannot use the is of identity. If you use the is of predication, that means that there are three gods, and each person is distinct, and each person has a predicate, which you refer to as godliness or as the divinity. And so each person is a god, and because they are all distinct, you have three distinct gods. This is another heresy. This is the heresy of tritheism, So you cannot use that one either. So you're stuck. Either you create another one, another is, and you go, relative identity or whatever. And then you make this exceptional case as to why we use this other is. And you go into that, which comes across mostly as post hoc reasoning. Or you throw logic out the window, like our guy here seems to do. Or you just go, oh no, it's not illogical. There is logic, we just don't quite understand it. But which isn't true. You can't make that claim because the LPT is an explicit problem that you can't just say it's not really there. It's not really a problem. No, it is. It's an issue, and it explicitly leads, if you pick either one of those is the is of identity or the is of predication, it leads you to make the claim, because you have to claim that God is one. You have to claim that there are three persons in the Trinity. You can't negate these two. But if you use the is of identity, then you have to say God is three persons and he is one person. Because the is of identity necessitates that there is only really one person. And the dogma, or the Trinitarian dogma, necessitates that you also have to say there are three persons, not one. So then you have to say there are three persons, not one, and you have to say there is one person, not three. That's a contradiction. If you use the is of predication, that necessitates that there are three gods, and you can't say three gods because dogma necessitates there is only one God, but the is of predication necessitates that there are three. So you have to say there are three gods, and you have to say there is one God, and these are not mutually conclusive or mutually compatible claims. And so you have a contradiction. And this makes people throw that out the window. But when they talk to polytheists, they bring logic back. If the polytheist says, no, God is 3 million, they'll be like, no, this is absurd. They won't say, oh, but God is not logical. So there's nothing, because if you say this, if you say belief in God is not logical, or that God is, or discussions about God are separate from logic, then what essentially you're saying is that it is possible that God could be 3 million, and he could be 3, and he could be 1, and he could be non-existent, and he could exist, and he could be powerful, and he could be weak. He could be all of these things all together, because God is not logical, and logic doesn't matter. So you could say all of these things, and you can't say no. You can't say that about God. Why? God isn't logic. Logic has nothing to do with God. So you could say God doesn't exist. What's the problem? You could say God exists and doesn't exist at the same time. The atheist isn't wrong. Yeah, when they make that claim, because their claim technically is true. It just so happens that your claim is also true, if there is nothing to do with logic here. This is the problem. If you completely want to throw logic out the window, you can't just pick and choose when you want to use it, depending on whether or not you're talking to a Muslim or a Hindu. It's funny though how it's very predictable. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what that sentence means. Yeah, because essentially what you're saying now is that you can't give dawah. You're not allowed to give reasons to people to believe in Islam. You're not allowed to give good reasons to people to believe in Islam and to prove to them that Islam is true by way of argument. You can't do that, because that is what logic and rationality is. Using good reasons to prove that something is true. If you're against logic and rationality and it should all be banned, what you're asking for is to ban dawah. Okay, but that could be true. And you could use logic. You could use your mind, your aql, your reason, to come to good conclusions. To discover that a statement is true. To recognize that God exists. You could use good reason to do that. There could be good reasons to submit to the Creator. You must think that there are good reasons for us all of the viewers here, all the Muslims, to become Christian. There has to be good reasons. You must think that if you believe Christianity is true, if you believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God, you have to believe there's good reasons to believe that. If you don't believe there's good reasons to believe that, then there's no reason for us to become Christian. Liberalism is not logic and rationality, bro. This is completely different. Liberalism is a political philosophy. Logic and reason is a whole separate subject. Liberalism is about how we should organize as a society and the things that we should allow and the things we should not allow. And logic and reason is to do with argumentation, about truth, about justification, about belief. Yeah, it's a more fundamental discussion than just politics, or not just politics, but a particular brand of politics, of which there are many. Where does it say that in Scripture? Where does it say that in Scripture? Give me a quote from your Scripture, from your Bible, that says that. That God wants every man to decide if God exists without logic. It's not to say that people can have just experiences. But even then, you could say this could be logical. If someone has a particular experience, and this is a justification to incline to a particular belief, then by definition, if you think that this experience here, whatever you call it, might be a dream, it could be a this, that, and the other. If you have an experience and then you believe in X religion, and you think this experience justifies believing in this religion, you believe this is logical. Yeah? Or if you think that you have been born into the right religion and you don't need to think about it, you think that because it is the right religion, then this belief is logical because it is true. God blessed you with that belief and you should continue to believing it. So because you happen to be on the right path, that is good enough reason to stay on it. And because it's self-evident, that is a reason. That's a justification. You think that is logical. It's not that you're using no logic. And then the question is that justified? Is that really logical, or is there a fallacy there somewhere? Is there a problem with your reasoning? I met this brother in Itikaf. Oh, mashallah. Which brother are you? I don't recall meeting a Dredgen Shuri. You don't necessarily need to give your name if you want to remain anonymous. Maybe mention something that we discussed or something that happened that would make me know who it is. See, now Omar is using logic. What happened? Omar, I thought you said logic should be banned. You're reasoning with him. You're trying to give him a reason not to engage in a particular idea. Astaghfirullah, akhi. Instead of propositional logic, how would the atheist-theist dichotomy... Oh, I'm never going to get to the bottom of these comments. You comment more while I'm reading. It's 1 o'clock. I want it to be done by 12. Stop commenting. I'm just going to get to the bottom now and then I'm going to go. Instead of propositional logic, how would the atheist-theist dichotomy fit into probabilistic logics like Bayesian inference, something more along the lines of gods most likely do not exist. So then you would be somewhat agnostic, but leaning towards atheism. So you're not a strong atheist. You're not like saying that atheism is without a shadow of a doubt true. You're open to the possibility that you may be wrong. So there's some sort of epistemic humility going on there. But you're still agnostic. But you do think that the atheist has done a better job than the theist to a certain degree, although you think that there could still be some objections, or there is some ambiguity, or there's room for error, and that your calculation of probability might actually fall the other way, or it might actually fall on like hard agnosticism, but you're not quite sure because you're still exploring it. So I guess in this case it would just be you're holding a conclusion based on inductive reasoning rather than deductive reasoning. Islam brings peace to your heart and mind. Of course it's important to engage the mind. Allah says, and do you not use your aql? Do you not think? Do you not reason? There are signs in the heavens and the earth and within your own selves for those who ponder, for those who reflect. That is, there is evidence to believe in God and in Islam for those that look up at the skies, that look upon the earth, that look within their own selves, that read the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that look at the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that those people that do all of these things should become a Muslim. Yeah, these things are good reason to accept the conclusion that Islam is true. Or if you're a Christian, you should think that all of this and the Bible and the life of Jesus alayhi salam, peace and blessings be upon him, that these are good reasons to believe in Christianity. If you're a Christian, you should believe that. Yeah, and if you don't, then you're confused, and there's no point engaging in missionary work. There's no point talking to people. Yeah, if you're trying to convince me to become a Christian, you believe there is good reason to become a Christian. Therefore, you believe that being a Christian is the logical choice. If you want to throw logic out the window, don't bother talking. Don't engage. No point. Leave it. Yeah? Because logic ain't going to get you there. There is a logic for my faith. But make up your mind, la. A moment ago, yeah, you're saying that because what is faith here? You're saying you believe in God, yeah? But you said a moment ago, you cannot prove God with logic, which is to say you cannot prove your faith in God's existence with logic. But then you've said there is a logic. That's another contradiction. This is, with all due respect, you seem like a nice guy. I'm not trying to be overly harsh. But that's a contradiction, yeah? You're saying there's no logic and there is logic. What a guan? What's going on? Exactly. Yeah. Samadi knows. I doubt I could support the claim no God exists, but I think there is good evidence that all the gods claim to exist thus far are most likely human invention, products of psychology and culture. Okay, so here I would say you're probably inclined towards what I define as agnosticism. So you're not an atheist. Yeah, so because the question or the proposition God exists is somewhat, can be at least, religion independent. Yeah, you can have a discussion without having to talk about Islam, or like two atheists could get together, or an agnostic and an atheist could get together. Neither of them believe in any religion, and they could have a discussion about whether the proposition no gods exist is true or false. Yeah, and they could disagree, and they could have a talk about that. So I would refer to what you're in at the moment would be like an agnostic position, and you've done a bleeming hell of a job if you've gone into all of these religions, or I don't know if you've just thought about. So what is it about all of these religions? Did you look into all of them? I'm not saying you have to, but I'm just interested about how you come to this position. Did you look into all of them and find good reason to reject each of them? That kind of thing. Yeah, and just out of interest as well, how do you identify as an atheist, or do I identify as an agnostic? Do you utilize terms like soft and hard, or other words to make a distinction? What's your thoughts on the whole semantics thing that I brought up earlier? Okay, so now you're giving argumentation. It doesn't make sense intellectually, then it doesn't make sense. It's that simple. How are you to accept something, to be at peace with something that doesn't make sense? Sin is punished with the cross for those who are not saved. Use your brain. Don't worry, Ed, you're not coming across as rude. So basically, the burden of proof lies on the person who's trying to convince the other person. It's got nothing to do with what they're showing, but rather to do with what they are trying to prove. Yes, it doesn't matter what it is you're trying to prove. If you're wanting someone else to believe, or if you're just wanting to justify it, even just to yourself, regardless of anyone else, there is a burden of proof. There could be certain things that don't require effort. So you could have, what some people refer to as basic beliefs that don't need justification in an explicit sense. And so therefore, you could a priori be justified in believing it. But even that is like, you would then say, you would have to give a justification as to why this is something that should be considered a basic belief. And how, because you could say anything is a basic belief. You could say, my belief that this cup will float randomly at 3 p.m. tomorrow is a basic belief. Like, why is that a basic belief? Or why is that not a basic belief? You have to still have that discussion, and that obviously comes with its own burdens. And you can try to shift the burden away, but then the burden just moves on to another conversation. So you'll circle that claim. You say this is a basic belief, and then you've got to say, okay, so why is this a basic belief and this isn't? Or why is this not a basic belief if you disagree? And then that's a whole other topic to go through. But it's not like, if you're an atheist, that doesn't mean you don't have a burden of proof. If you're making positive claims, like for example, sometimes people claim atheism is the default position, right? Why do you think that? The evidence seems to suggest the opposite. There are children that have a belief or a natural inclination. What's the reason for that is irrelevant. Whether you could obviously, if you're an atheist, you're going to say that that's some evolutionary adaptation. If you're a theist, or like a Muslim, for example, you're going to say that's the fitrah. Sorry, I'm tired now. You're going to say that's the fitrah. So you're going to have different explanations as to why children have that belief. But it is evidence that atheism isn't a natural position. There's a whole article on that called "Religion is Natural" by Paul Bloom, who is an atheist, talking about why religion is natural, why human beings in childhood have a natural inclination towards religious beliefs. Vague ones, like belief in an afterlife, belief in a creator, or a belief in a higher power in a vague sense, belief in the body and the soul, those kind of things. What kind of afterlife? Those things can be religion specific to a certain degree, but there's no evidence atheism is a neutral position or like the default position. And if you want to make the claim that it is, you have a burden of proof to show that. And if I want to say, no, that's false, I have a burden of proof. Even if you don't give a burden, you just make the claim atheism is the neutral position. You don't have to prove that, I guess, if you don't want to, if you can't be bothered. I can't force you to. But I could take on a burden if I want to say, if you want to convince other people, if you want to convince me, yeah, that atheism is a neutral position, you've got to give me a reason to believe that. And if you don't, there's no obligation for me to accept it, because you've just made a statement and you've not backed it up with anything. But I could go, well, actually, no, that's false. And now I have a burden of proof. Yeah? You may still have yours and you may take up that burden or not. But now, because I've said it is false, atheism isn't a neutral position, now I've got to go find some empirical evidence or some essay or some logically deductive sound argument that shows what I think is true, especially if I want to convince other people. Especially if I want to say that I'm justified in believing that. Yeah, so then I could go and get Paul Bloom's article called Religion is Natural, show it to you and show how atheism quite clearly isn't a default position. I could go through historical evidences and how every single civilization that's ever existed has believed in some sort of supernatural entities, in life after death. You could explain it however you want. You could go through it in terms of some evolutionary process that still doesn't matter, because that conclusively shows that atheism isn't the default position, which is a separate conversation about whether or not atheism is true. Yeah, you can make lots of different claims. The atheist does make lots of claims. Yeah, and when they make those claims, if they want to convince other people it's true, they've got a burden. You've got a burden. You can take the burden up or not. You can be lazy and say, no, I can't be bothered. All right, fair enough. Then we don't have to talk. Yeah, I'm not at fault for not just believing what you've said without you providing a justification for it. Especially if I already think that the position I'm on is true and I believe I have valid justification for that. If you're not willing to engage in it in any way, then I'm just going to be on what I'm on and you're going to be on what you're on. Like the Quran says. Yeah? Me to my religion and you to yours. Whether or not you even consider it a religion. I don't really care. But there is burdens. Everyone's got these burdens. Yusuf, last question. What do you believe existed first at the beginning of the universe? The concept of truth or consciousness or logic? Right, so what I believe to be true is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the eternal, and that He has a number of attributes. He always has existed. He always will exist. Yeah? That His non-existence is impossible. He will never perish, and He has never not been. And He has a number of attributes that He has had into eternity past, and He will always have. One of them is that He is the most wise. He is the all-knowing. Yeah? And in this is the foundation for things like logic, etc., and truth. They're related to Allah's eternal existence and His attributes, which are perfect and lack deficiencies. And these other concepts, they're found in that, or they're at least rooted in it. And Allah exists, and He is the truth, and everything He creates comes from Him, and whatever is to be said to be true is dependent upon Him. Yeah, because He is the truth. He is the haqq, al-haqq. Yeah. Logic, again, is just about the relationship between things. And so there could be said to be some sort of fundamental logic that is rooted in the knowledge of Allah, and so on and so forth. And then you could have other forms of logic that sort of are emergent from the point of creation. So, the idea that, typically speaking, a human being requires a mum and a dad to be born. There is like an arbitrary sense of logic there. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in charge of creating the conditions. And if He so wills, because He is powerful, He can intervene in the creation in some way. And He could create a being like Adam alayhi salam or Jesus alayhi salam without one or both of its parents. Because there's nothing necessary about a parent in terms of creating a thing. All you require is power. Allah is the all-powerful. He has power. You need wisdom, Allah is the most wise. You need knowledge, Allah is the all-knowing. He has all of those attributes, and so therefore he can create. And then from like a limited perspective, we draw a line around our own experiences. And we might say, if we were to bump into someone and they were to say, my son was born without a father, we might throw the word illogical out there, but it's just another black swan fallacy. Because we've never seen it happen ourselves, we're like, oh, therefore it could never happen. But yeah, those are my thoughts. Good lessons for today. Can't wait for another stream, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from you, Yusuf, for audio. Ameen, ameen, and you all, ameen. Thank you for the stream. May Allah bless you and you as well. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Are you open for university lecture events in Canada? Online session? Yeah. Depending on what you want, though. But feel free to email y.ponders at sapiensinstitute.org. Interesting. Alhamdulillah. Wa iyak. Wa alaykum salam. Oh, you wrote it again. Mankind ahead is unfortunately theist, a hedonism, and rejection of prophetic teachings amongst Muslims, unfortunately. May Allah guide the Ummah. May Allah guide us and increase us and protect us from evil. If you'd ever want to talk about it in detail with me on my channel, let me know. Yeah, again, you just send me an email as well, bro, if you want to chat about it. And if I've got time, I'll try and make time for it, inshallah. Do more of these, inshallah. It was, but he clarified later that he was talking about liberalism. No, he was confusing a particular strand of political philosophy with logic. It wasn't even just with Greek logic. Because it turned out he was just talking about liberalism. I'm just going to try and get through all of these comments. I'm not going to pull them all up because I want to get to the bottom of everything. Well, I've just had a haircut and I went to a new barber, so he might have shaved it a bit different or cut it a bit different. I'm not sure if I like it, to be honest, but that might be why. Or maybe it's because I'm getting chunky. But I have been getting fat. Maybe it's because I'm stressed. Maybe it's because of lots of different things. So it depends on what you mean by quote-unquote real existence. It's not an entity. It's not like me or you. Whatever existence it has is not the same as yourself. Yeah. It's got an existence insofar as it's related to ideas. Yeah, how ideas and thoughts and propositions that we say are true relate to each other. This is completely different than talking about how an atom exists, or how you exist, or how God exists, or how angels exist, or how hellfire exists. It's not the same as that. Yeah, it's related to knowledge. You can replay it. You just go back to the beginning and play Purple Cats. Wow, I'm really behind. Which message? Wow, so behind. I really need to try and get to the bottom of these. The thing is, I can't just step away from it as well. A little bit. Most of the philosophy I studied was continental. So I did big units on like Kant, Heidegger, Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, Husserl, a lot of the phenomenologists. There was some analytical, but the university that I went to had a very continental leaning. I had like a couple units on mind, reason, and reality, for example. So we had a whole semester, well, a whole year, studying logic, reason, argumentation. That book in particular, actually, this one. It's disconnected. So this book. So I spent a whole year studying this, and then I had like a number of exams on that. This book was very analytical. Crap. Can you do me a favour? I'm too tired to go through this now. Can you email it me? And I'll have a look at it. Oh, I can screenshot it. Crap. What's that? I've screenshotted. I'll send to myself. I'll check that out later, inshallah. Thank you for commenting. Like I said, feel free to email. I can engage with you a little bit when I get time, inshallah. Because it's getting late now and I'm just trying to get to the bottom. I really want to go to bed. Yeah, that went out the window. Don't end. I need to end. Bloody hell, I'm half an hour behind. It's 1:30. I've really got to go. Crap. The reason is because I take so long to read them and people fire more comments on it. Like, it's impossible for me to get to the bottom. Because I read one comment and then you write another 10. So I'm trying to skip a load just so I can get to the bottom and say salam. Yes, it's a bad habit. I kind of have this urge in me to see what everyone's had to say. Just in case there's something interesting. Okay, So Smackdown says, haven't looked into everything, but I've seen enough to go on a limb. Makes that a tentative conclusion. More than willing to hear falsifying evidence in response to my argument above. Yeah, I will engage with that. Like I say, send me an email. I'll be happy to engage with it. But saying that, am I at the end? I'm at the end. The spread of God claim can be shown to exceed human limitations that would make me seriously question or altogether abandon this conclusion. I do appreciate your level-headed response either way. I like your approach overall. Alhamdulillah, I'm glad you like it. Yeah, I think the biggest problem with a lot of this conversation is both the theist and the atheist can get very toxic when it comes to burdens of proof. Not necessarily all of them. For the most part, people can be nice, but the people that incline towards public discussion, we'll say, on platforms like YouTube, can have an inclination to a certain personality type, and that personality type can be very difficult to have a discussion with. That's why the YouTube is mostly filled with drama, and why I don't really like jumping on public platforms that often. Alright, buzzing. Yeah, so there's a nice little conversation back and forth between Samadi and Smackdab. What is that? What do you think of the MCEAR objection? I don't know what that objection is. He's almost here. How does intelligence arise from non-intelligence? Disproves evolution. It depends on how you put it. You just instantly just wrote that and then just said goodbye. And you as well, Faisal. Barakallahu feek. Apologies you missed it. I'm going to leave it up though so you can rewatch it, inshallah. Anybody who that's what I say to my kids. Anyone who says anything else now stinks. If anyone screams or cries again, you smell. And you remember me and us all in your du'as as well. Do you define omnipotence as the ability to stop asking questions? I'm tired, man. Do you find... Let me focus. Do you define omnipotence as the ability to do all metaphysically possible things, all logically possible things? So I say illogical things are not things. A married bachelor is not a thing. Impossibilities, logical impossibilities, are not actual things. So if you say God cannot create a married bachelor, that doesn't mean God is not omnipotent. It means that the word, or the conjunction of the two words, married and bachelor, negates the meaning of both, and essentially you're not communicating anything. And the sentence, or the question, can God create a married bachelor negate each other, and then all you're left with is, can God create ... And it's like, can God create what? A married bachelor. What's a married bachelor? It's not a thing. So if you're married, if a thing is married, if a person is married, to be married by definition is to not be a bachelor. To be a bachelor is by definition to not be married. So it's not a limit. When if you say God cannot do a logically impossible thing, it's not. That's not a power. That's not an ability, because the word is meaningless when you add them together. It's like we used to have this robot at school when we were kids, and it had like this little machine thing, and then it had like arrows, like this. These are like little buttons, and then it had like numbers, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm just gonna do circles. And then it had like a little screen, and then you'd put commands in. So you would say like forward. I think there was even like brackets. It was just to visualize. It was a weird maths thing. So you could say forward 2, and these were like meters. So you could say forward 2, right 3, and then it would just, you put that command in, and then this little machine would go forward 2 meters. It would stop, and then it would turn, and then it would go right 3 meters. But then, if you wanted, you could put things in brackets. So you could say like, so in brackets, forward 1 meter plus backwards. Oh crap! Backwards 1 meter, and because you'd done this in such a way, when you put the command in, it wouldn't move. Yeah, or if in a calculator, you get a calculator, and like any calculator at all. If you put in the in a scientific calculator, if you put positive 1 or just 1 plus negative 1, yeah, what does that equal? It equals 0. So it looks like you're saying something, but the output is nothing. So it's like, oh, there's all this movement, there's all this stuff, there's all this thing, and this could be married, and this could be bachelor. And essentially, when you add these things together, you don't have anything. You've got nothing. The word, these have meaning on their own. So like if you claim Dave is married, you've given some information about Dave. You know Dave is married. He has a wife. Yeah? Or today, maybe something else, because we live in a strange world. But he could be married. But you could also say that he's a bachelor. Yeah, so he might not be married at all. Doesn't have a wife. He's single. If you say Dave is either of these things, yeah, that's fine. But if you say Dave is both of these things, then you have a problem. It's the same thing with like a squared circle, or a square circle. Yeah, a square by definition has 4 sides. Yeah, and a circle does not have 4 sides. So you can't have a squared circle by definition, because these are mutually exclusive things. What makes a square makes a circle not a square. What makes a circle makes a square not a circle. And so you can't just mishmash whatever you want together, because language, communication, meaning, if you're trying to communicate something to me, what you say has to have meaning. Yeah? And when you say something like, can God create a squared circle? Or can God create a married bachelor? Essentially, you might as well just be saying skip that, like there's no, you're not uttering anything anymore, because you're throwing words together that cannot be thrown together. That's my position with regards to this. He's not at the finish line, and then I talked a lot more. 3 hours we've been streaming. Wa alaykum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah bless you all. David's just a very confused person. Yes. Alhamdulillah. No more comments. Although there's 22 of you. You've all been very good to not type anything. Although brother Akam was a bit naughty and he asked something anyway. Yeah. Make sure to leave a comment if you're still one of the 23 tuned in when the stream finishes. And just give me your feedback. Let me know what you thought. Keep in mind, I wanted to do this to turn it into a course. So in relation to that specifically, any feedback at all will be greatly appreciated. Where do you think I went wrong? Where do you think I was mistaken? Where do you think I could tidy it up? If you got a comment on the structure or the order, do you think I've missed anything that I should add? How can I improve this or make it better? Or make it less bad, at least. Yeah. Give me your feedback. Theist, atheist, agnostic, marshmallow, whatever you are, engage critically with what I've said. I will be reading the comments. I won't necessarily respond to all of them, but I will hear what you have to say and take that into consideration in the production of the course. And what you say may end up affecting how the course ends up looking when it goes on the learning platform. Inshallah, if Hamza, Mohammed Hijab are happy with my proposition. But yeah, Jazakallah khair for tuning in. It's 3 hours long. Maybe the first 1.5 hours were just the course. And then the other bit was me trying to get to the bottom of this. Got a new sub. Thank you for subscribing. And pleasure engaging with you. Look forward to talking to you again. Will be live or recorded. Well, I could practice it live and then record it. And then it'll probably go on the learning platform. Which is not on here, so I'm going to have to type it. So I'll put it here. Pending agreement from the boss men. There's lots of courses on there already, so go check them out, including my nihilism course and other people's courses, which are all very good. I recommend checking them out. Or if you prefer reading, some people prefer reading, then go to this link, or just sapiensinstitute.org. You can get access to all of the other things, including the learning platform and the books and the essays and the Lighthouse Project. Blah, 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 blah. You can get access to all of that on there. Yeah. I'm so tired now, I don't know how to end a stream. But inshallah, I will sleep like a baby. There we go. We'll leave it there. Wa alaykum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah. Bro, I've been streaming for 3 hours. It's 20 to 2. I'm tired. I want to go. So I'm going to end it. I'm flattered that you want me to keep going. But I don't have it in me. I'm also hungry. Could eat. Yeah, nice to see you too. Alright guys, Jazakallah khair for tuning in. There you go, here's my email again one last time. If you want to email. But other than that, Barakallahu feek. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Take care.